Some cakes don't need reinventing as they never go out of fashion. So in today's carrot cake recipe, I'm going to resist the temptation to mess with a classic. Well, almost anyway. Rather than decorate with a vegan cream cheese, I'm going to fill and top a 2-layer carrot cake with a cashew cream frosting. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start with nuts, and I'm going to use walnuts today because I'm trying to keep this classic, but you can use pecans if you prefer. I've got enough walnuts for the batter and for the decoration, and I'm going to toast these in the oven to bring out the flavour for just 7 or 8 minutes at 180 degrees C. I'm going to mark my tray to make sure I don't get confused. Now you can skip this step if you prefer, but you'll get a more average carrot cake if you do that, and who wants an average carrot cake? On to the most important ingredient in our cake, lovely sweet carrots. And I'm going to top and tail these quickly before grating them. And little nerdy nugget here on grating. If we grate too finely, we'll get a lovely smooth topped cake, but it won't have that open, coarse texture that we expect from a carrot cake. If we grate them too coarsely, then we'll have a lovely flecked orange crumb, but it'll look rugged, it'll look a bit knobbly, and maybe be a bit crumbly to cut as well. So to compromise, I'm going to grate half very coarsely, and I'm going to add that through by hand at the end of the mixing process, and the other half I'm going to grate very finely. I'm going to add that into the wet mix so it integrates really well, and we get that really nice moist crumb that we expect from a carrot cake. So unless you want to risk your fingers by grating right to the end of the carrot, to make sure you get the right weight, a little tip here is to grate your carrot first and then weigh it, rather than weigh your carrots and then grate it. So I'm going to add my coarsely grated carrots into the batter after mixing as an addition, and I've got 2 other additions going into my cake, fruit and the walnuts that I've already toasted. And there is a bit of debate as to whether a carrot cake should contain fruit or not. I love dried fruit, so I'm going to use raisins, but you can leave them out of this recipe and it'll still work really well. On to nuts next, and my nuts are cool and ready to be chopped. Now for the batter, you want a nice coarsely chopped walnut. If you're making this for kids or someone who doesn't like nuts, then if you chop them really small, you'll be able to sneak them into the batter under the radar. I'm going to chop them in a food processor just to save a bit of time. And for the decoration side of things, this is up to you. I'm going to do a nice nut dust across the top of my cake, so I'm going to use the food processor to chop them very small. It takes about 8 to 10 seconds. Bit of a nerdy nugget here: if you chop them for a lot longer, the oil will come out of the walnuts and you'll start to get the formation of a bit of a walnut butter in your food processor, and you'll never sprinkle them on top of your cake. So if you're going to use a food processor, keep it nice and short. 8 to 10 seconds should be plenty. I'm going to put my coarsely chopped walnuts aside with my other additions for later, and I'm going to put my nut dust aside as well when I come to decorate my cake. And I'm going to start the wet mix with my finely grated carrot, and that's going to go straight into a bowl with a paddle attachment. I'm then going to add almond milk, sunflower oil, golden castor sugar and apple cider vinegar. And I couldn't resist one little tweak here. I'm going to use orange extract. Nothing radical in that. Lots of recipes use orange zest, and it just gives a lovely subtle citrus zing to the whole cake. I'm going to mix this for 6 minutes on speed 1. So whilst that's mixing, I'm going to get my oven preheated again to 160 degrees C. I'm going to get my tins ready next. And I'm using 20 centimetre round tins with baking belts that I've pre-soaked. And these baking belts really help to give a flat top surface to the cake without the faff of having to cut them level. I'm going to line and grease those, and then I'm going to crack on with the dry ingredients after that. Okay, dry ingredients next, and I'm going to start with spices. I've got ground ginger and cinnamon, and if you don't like ground ginger, you can swap this for extra cinnamon, but you will get quite a dark cake and you won't be able to see those flecks of carrot in the crumb. Raisin agents next. This needs quite a bit of firepower in this cake. There's a lot of additions in here, so I'm going to use baking powder and baking soda. Pea protein next, some salt, and white spelt flour. Now I use white spelt flour a lot in my cakes. It gives a very tender crumb, but you can swap and use all-purpose flour if you prefer. I'm going to stir this through very thoroughly because I don't want those spices to be lurking at the bottom. Lastly, almond flour. Now it's not very common in carrot cakes, but it really adds the nutty flavour and it gives a lovely moist crumb as well. And all great carrot cakes should have a very, very moist crumb. And whilst the wet mix is just finishing, I'm going to have a quick clear up. I've made quite a bit of a mess already. So I'm going to add my dry ingredients into my wet ingredients and mix on speed 1 for 40 seconds. Now I'm going to stir in half the fruit, half the carrot and half the walnuts and fold through by hand. Then the other half of fruit, the other half of carrot and the other half of walnuts and fold through again. I'm going to tip out into our tins, and obviously being a bit of a nerd, I'm going to weigh mine to make sure they're exactly the same in both tins. You want approximately 850 grams per tin. I'm going to level it off with a palette knife and bake at 160 degrees C for 48 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. Our cakes are out of the oven and starting to cool. I'm going to leave them in the tins for about 45 minutes just to finish off their baking process. After that, I'm going to tip them onto a cooling rack and allow them to cool fully for an hour or two. I don't want to put any of our cashew cream onto a hot cake, otherwise it'll melt and flow over the sides. So while they're cooling, I'm going to make the cashew cream. And I'm going to start by soaking our cashews in cold water for about 20 minutes or so. The longer you soak cashews for, the more water they absorb. If you soak them overnight, for example, they take on 3 times the amount of water that they do in 20 minutes. I don't want my cashew cream to be too wet, otherwise it won't be stable at room temperature. Again, it'll end up flowing down the sides. So I found 20 minutes is a sweet spot for this recipe. Now, not everyone's got room in their fridge for a large cake to keep that cashew cream nice and firm. So the next ingredient we're going to add in is cocoa butter. And I'm going to use a powdered version of cocoa butter, but if you can only get hold of the drops, then make sure you grind them as fine as you can in a food processor before starting on the next step. Coconut cream next, and we're going to use chilled coconut cream, ideally overnight. Little nerdy nugget here, there are loads of different coconut creams on the market now, and there are some that are specifically aimed at us bakers. I've got 3 to show you here, all with different coconut contents, 95%, 85% and 80%. Doesn't seem like a big difference, but just like the soak time on the cashews, the thickness of the coconut will really affect how your cream holds up at room temperature. This recipe is based on the thicker, more concentrated 85% or 95% creams. And the last ingredient in our cashew cream is icing sugar, and we need this really fine sugar to help make our cream nice and smooth. It also helps to lighten the colour a little bit as well. I'm going to add all these into a food processor, and I've drained my cashews and they're going in as well. And I'm going to blend for 5 minutes. Every couple of minutes I'm going to do a little scrape down to make sure everything's mixing really well. And then I'm going to refrigerate for at least an hour or 2. I found the best temperature to use it at is about 10 to 12 degrees C. So I'm getting ready for decoration, and I've got all my bits and pieces on the table here ready. The first thing I'm going to use is a turntable. You don't need a turntable to decorate this cake, but it definitely makes life easier. And after I've decorated my cake, it's going to go into the fridge so that the cashew cream can set. I'm going to use a lifter on top of my turntable, which will fit in my fridge. So if you haven't got a lifter or a turntable, put the cake straight onto a plate or onto a cake board, as long as it fits in your fridge. That's the main thing. The next thing I've got ready is a mini offset spatula with some hot water. I've also got a couple of piping bags. I'm going to pipe my cream on to get a nice even layer. I've also got my nut dust from earlier, and I'm going to use the bottom of a cake tin as a little template for dusting over my cake to create a little crescent shape. And then finally, I've got some peeled carrot on my little peeler, and I'm going to decorate my cake with some ribbons on top, just to bring out that orange colour. I'm going to put my first layer on my turntable upside down, so the smoothest side's on top. I'm then going to use a piping bag to apply the cream nice and evenly. I'm not going to go right to the edge in case the cream wants to come out and drip down the sides. If you're not using a piping bag, just use a spoon to put half your cream onto the first layer and spread it out with a palette knife nice and evenly. You definitely want this flat so the top layer doesn't want to slide off. Then put the second layer of cake on top, the rest of the cream, and spread out again. Finish off with a sprinkle of nut dust and a shaving of carrot, and refrigerate very thoroughly for 1 to 2 hours before you start cutting it. You can see the flecks of carrot in there, look. It certainly looks super moist anyway. Oh, that is lovely and moist with tons of classic carrot cake flavour. And the cashew cream, well, that adds a little touch of luxury without overpowering the cake. I'm really happy with this. I hope you fancy making it at home. I will put a link to the recipe in the description below. If you want to make a smaller version of this cake, then you could just halve the recipe and make a single layer cake maybe, or a tray bake. That would work really well as well. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe to support my channel. Cheers for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.